Hello and welcome to Big Picture Monday. My name is Cali Black and I'm here to give you all the context that you need to totally rock this week's Come Follow Me readings. This week I'm really excited because we are starting Holy Week. We are starting Holy Week. If you look at all of the four Gospels, there is almost a third of their writings that are devoted to the final week of Jesus's life. So this is not going to be just a week. We are going to spend a week studying just the first couple days, and I'll help you feel totally confident about how that all fits together. But boy, am I excited. The official chapters are, it's a lot this week, just heads up. Matthew chapters 21 through 23, Mark chapter 11, Luke chapters 19 and 20, and John chapter 12. That's 7 chapters total. If you're like a chapter a day person, that fits perfectly into your schedule this week. But of course, they're all amazing. And we're in all 4 of the Gospels. All 4 of the Gospels cover Holy Week, absolutely, very extensively even. So we will be in, not all 4 of them every single week from here on out, but we'll be in a lot for sure. Especially after this past General Conference, I am just like super excited to dive into Holy Week even more. When we actually celebrate Holy Week, like prior to Easter, it goes by so fast. And I know so many of us want to be like, here's what happened this day, and here's what happened this day, and here's the one thing that happened this way. There's like, for some of the days, we have tons of stuff that happened. Like, it's really hard to just boil it down to like, here's the one thing we can talk about today. And so I love that we get to stretch it out and really dive into these events and talk about them. Now, speaking to our part of our minds that want to like lay out exactly what happened every day, because that's how my brain works. I want to know. I want a list. You're going to notice as we go through the events in all 4 of the different gospel accounts, there are some inconsistencies. We are used to that with all our different accounts, but when it comes to like what day something happened on, you're like, come on, how could that be inconsistent? If you have my study guide, I go into a few reasons why that's the case, but I want to point out one, and that is that the Romans and the Jews had their days starting at different times. And so what happened on one day, if it's in the nighttime or in the morning or in the evening time right before it gets dark, varies greatly on how they would be counting what their days are. So that can account for some of the differences here. However, there is kind of like tradition that tells us what happens on each day. So that's what I'm going to kind of base off of this week. And if you're reading and you're like, wait, they say the next day here, that means that that's probably the outlier account, because just kind of scholars and tradition in general has dictated, okay, here's the schedule that we can pretty much agree on for what happened on what day. So this week we are going to study Palm Sunday. We're actually going to have like one thing that happened right before Palm Sunday. So a small event right beforehand in just one account. Palm Sunday. We're going to cover Monday, which we don't have too much happening on Monday that we have recorded. We know that Jesus cleanses the temple. That's usually like the biggest thing that people will say on Monday is Jesus cleanses the temple. He also curses a fig tree. So those are the things we know about Monday. And then we're actually this week going to start a little bit on Tuesday. However, Tuesday is packed with stuff. When you think Tuesday of Holy Week, think Tuesday teaching. Jesus teaches. He teaches a lot on Tuesday. So actually next week, we're going to study all the rest of Tuesday because there's a lot. But this week we will at least start it. So this week we've got Palm Sunday, we've got Monday, and we've got a little bit of Tuesday, and I'll kind of walk you through each account and what we get in each version, okay? So let's get started because we've got a lot of chapters to go through here, and I want you to feel confident in what's happening in each one and what day it's aligned with, so that as you're reading, you can be like, yes, I understand what's going on here. Okay, let's start with Matthew. When we start in Matthew chapter 21, this is gonna give us the events of Palm Sunday, and it's gonna give us Monday as well. So Matthew 21 gives us Palm Sunday and Monday. We start with Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry. This is when Jesus is arriving into Jerusalem. Now, just as background, remember, everyone's known if he goes to Jerusalem, the Pharisees are going to find an excuse to put him to death. And of course, Jesus knew what was happening. But even on a mortal level, it seemed like this is what's going to happen. Now, not everyone realized that. He had just converted a bunch of people by raising Lazarus from the dead. We don't get that account in Matthew, we get it in John, but a lot of people are there. They're shouting Hosanna. They're acknowledging that Jesus is the Messiah. They're finally believing it. A lot of the people are. And so we get this beautiful triumphal entry. They're waving palm fronds. They're laying their garments out on the floor, their clothes, as just a sign of respect. That was the biggest sign of respect that they could have given, and that's what they were doing. We then get a record on Monday. Jesus cleanses the temple. He also heals some people, and then he curses a fig tree. And of course, cursing of the fig tree, we'll talk about this more this week, but that is very symbolic, very symbolic. And so he teaches his disciples as well about faith. And not being hypocrites, and he focuses a lot on hypocrisy actually this week. And then we get into Jesus arguing with some of the different groups of people, the Pharisees. They're trying to argue with him about his authority. Does he actually have priesthood authority? And Jesus, of course, isn't arguing, but he's talking about that with them, and he ends up giving a parable of the two sons and the wicked husbandman. So look for that at the end of that chapter. Okay, next chapter in Matthew, chapter 22. This one is going to be all focused about Tuesday. So we're getting lots of teaching Tuesday, right? We get the parable of the marriage feast. We then get lots of other groups questioning Jesus, trying to trip him up, right? They're looking for any excuse to get him into prison at this point. And so they're trying to just get him to say blasphemy. And so they're asking him a lot of questions, and Jesus is teaching a lot about mercy. He's teaching about marriage. He's teaching about giving tribute to Caesar. Like, yeah, give Caesar what Caesar needs and give God the things that God needs. Basically, like, follow the rules of your government and also obey God. Like, you can do both. And then he gives the greatest two commandments. This is when Jesus teaches to love God and to love our neighbors as the two greatest commandments that he can give. What a beautiful, like, culminating teaching for Tuesday of the final week of his life. We then go to chapter 23 in Matthew. This is still about Tuesday, still teachings on Tuesday here. Jesus is teaching the Pharisees, calling them out for being hypocrites. They're teaching the right things, but they're not actually following through on what those things are. Teaching that the greatest people are going to be the most humble people. This was a big theme from last week as well, right? And that they will be responsible for the prophets that they have killed. Of course, alluding to the fact that they're about to kill the greatest prophet of all. Okay, now let's go to Mark. Mark, we have just one chapter, and in this one chapter, we cover all of Sunday, we cover Monday, which isn't much, right? And we start into Tuesday. So Mark likes to just kind of capture it all, right? We've kind of caught on the fact that we're only on Mark 11 at this point. His chapters are longer, and he doesn't give as much detail, right? Remember, we've talked about this before. A lot of people assume that Mark wrote his account first, and then Matthew and Luke took Mark's account and added extra details and teachings and perspectives that Mark might have missed out on. So that makes sense. We're only in chapter 11 of Mark, whereas we're in chapter 23 in Matthew. So in Mark, we get the triumphal entry, and that's all that we have record of for Sunday, by the way, is just the triumphal entry. It's an amazing event, but that's all that we have record of. We then get on Monday, Jesus cursing the fig tree and cleansing the temple. And then we have Tuesday, he's teaching about faith. There's lots of the different groups that are trying to trap Jesus. They're trying to question him about his authority. And it's interesting in this account, Jesus then throws out John the Baptist's name and says, well, where did John the Baptist get his authority? Remember, everyone loved John the Baptist. Everyone loved him and totally respected him as a prophet. And so that kind of trips the Pharisees up. They don't respond to that question because they know John the Baptist then baptized Jesus. And so if they're going to deny Jesus, they'd have to deny John the Baptist as well, and they don't want to do that. Okay, that's it for Mark, right? Speeding through those 3 days. Okay, Luke, we get 2 chapters. The first chapter, chapter 19, we're covering the little event that happens before Holy Week, and then about halfway through chapter 19, we will start with Palm Sunday, and we'll also get Monday, okay? So here's the event that happens at the beginning of Luke chapter 19. Jesus is actually traveling through Jericho, okay? He's almost to Jerusalem, but he's traveling through Jericho. And while he's there is a publican. Now remember, publicans are the tax collectors. They're the ones that no one likes. Not just like they don't like publicans. Publicans were not very honest people. They don't have great reputations. But there was one publican in particular, and his name was Zacchaeus. And it even gives some background on this man named Zacchaeus, that he was actually very righteous. And if he made a mistake, he would give people even more money, and he never was hoarding things that he shouldn't hoard. Like, Zacchaeus seems to be a really good guy, and Zacchaeus really wants to see Jesus. He knows that Jesus is coming through town, and he can't see him, so he climbs up a tree to look at Jesus. And as Jesus walks by, he sees Zacchaeus, and he sees his effort that he put into wanting to see Jesus. And in fact, Jesus talks to Zacchaeus. He doesn't only talk to Zacchaeus, he invites himself over to stay at Zacchaeus' home that evening. And of course, the Pharisees in town do not like this. Jesus is widely criticized for even talking to a publican, nonetheless inviting himself over to stay. But Zacchaeus does invite that and welcomes that happening. So I love this little encounter that we have with Jesus and a publican that no one else likes, but Jesus sees our hearts. He knows who we are, and that is a beautiful theme to lead us into Holy Week. All right, about halfway through the chapter, then you're going to see the triumphal entry, and then we'll go into the events of Monday as well. This is when we'll get Jesus weeps for Jerusalem as well. That's a big one. And he cleanses the temple. I also missed, I want to point this out earlier in chapter 19, before we get to the triumphal entry, Jesus gives the parable of the pounds. So there is one parable in chapter 19 there. So look for the parable of the pounds. Okay, then we get into chapter 20. This says it's mostly Tuesday. We start with Jesus cleansing the temple, which is traditionally put on Monday. We then get all the different groups trying to trick Jesus and get him to say blasphemy, and talking about his authority and faith and marriage, all those teachings that we've read about in the other accounts. And then we get, again, the parable of the wicked husbandman. So look for that one again. And then Jesus teaching about give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Like, follow the rules and obey God. You can do both. It's okay. You've got this. Okay, let's move on to our final account, the book of John. Remember, this is the account where we had just learned that Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. That was the last chapter in John, okay? And that had converted so many people. They're all so excited to be believing on Jesus. But we also saw the Pharisees now with this huge impetus to get Jesus gone. And they're working with Caiaphas, the high priest there in Jerusalem, to lay some plans. So we know that in the background, right? The first thing that we get in John chapter 12, though, is Mary. This is Mary of Bethany. So Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, that Mary. We call her Mary of Bethany because that's where she's from. And the evening before, she is anointing Jesus's feet with this beautiful, expensive oil. And Judas Iscariot is there. Yes, this is the Judas that will betray Jesus in just a few days. And he criticizes Mary for using this beautiful ointment. And Jesus teaches to Judas that Jesus isn't going to be around for a long time. He's not going to be around for a long time. And this shows what's in Mary's heart. Then we get the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. We get a little bit of background. Remember, John's really good at giving us background about what the Pharisees are like doing and plotting in the background. So again, we see these Pharisees being like, what is going on here? We need to get Jesus gone. And not only Jesus, they're also plotting against Lazarus. Lazarus being alive is what converted a whole bunch of people. So they need to kill Lazarus as well. And that's part of their plans. We then get Jesus teaching about his upcoming death. He's prophesying that that will happen. And whoever receives Jesus receives the Father as well. Okay, that's it for this week. A lot of stuff going on, but of course, fantastic things to be studying about. Again, we're focusing on Sunday, Monday, and then the first part of Tuesday, and we'll finish up next week all focused on the rest of Tuesday. There's a lot of teachings that Jesus did on Tuesday. My personal focus question this week, I love that Jesus, we finally get him teaching the two greatest commandments, to love God and to love our neighbors. And I really want to focus on that this week. First of all, as a challenge to kind of see where I can connect the lines between how every covenant, every ordinance, every little principle of the gospel comes back to those two big commandments. And then kind of evaluate my heart. How am I doing on loving God above all else? And then right beneath that, loving others as well. How am I doing? Because if those are the two greatest, I should probably be evaluating that one a lot. Okay, have a great week this week and happy studying.